The U.S. China trade war takes a new turn every day, and now we've reached a nuclear-level tariff. On April 15th, the White House announced a 245% tariff on imports from China. The reason given is China's retaliatory measures against the U.S., and this tariff is intended to create a fair competitive environment. At the same time, anonymous sources from the Chinese government told Bloomberg that China is willing to restart trade talks, but with multiple conditions attached. This shows that while Xi Jinping wants to show a willingness to make peace, he also can't afford to be seen as weak. The White House stated that over 75 countries have approached the U.S. to discuss new trade agreements, and during these discussions, the tariff measures will be paused. However, China is excluded from this, and it has taken retaliatory actions against the U.S. As a result, China now faces tariffs up to 245% on its products entering the U.S. On April 15th, Trump, through a White House spokesperson, called on China to come to an agreement with the U.S., and now it's up to China to decide. Alongside this news, another development has caught attention. This marks China's first time privately expressing a desire to negotiate. Bloomberg on April 16th quoted a source that said China wants to see the Trump administration take several measures before agreeing to trade talks. These include controlling disparaging remarks from cabinet members to show more respect. Beijing also wants the U.S. to appoint a presidentially supported negotiator and help prepare an agreement that Trump and President Xi can sign when they meet. According to this insider, the most important condition for any talks is that Chinese officials need to know that such discussions will be conducted with respect. Although Trump has generally been mild when speaking about Xi, other members of the Trump administration have taken a more hawkish stance, making Chinese officials uncertain of the U.S. position. When U.S. officials make sharp comments about China and Trump doesn't reject these views, Chinese officials assume that Trump tacitly supports them. The source also said, in addition to wanting a unified message from the U.S. government, Beijing officials want to know if the U.S. is prepared to address some of China's concerns. One major concern is that Chinese officials believe U.S. policies are aimed at containing and suppressing China's modernization. Additionally, China wants the U.S. to address national security issues, especially the Taiwan issue. China insists it won't provoke any action on Taiwan, but will respond if provoked. Furthermore, Chinese officials understand that Trump may want to personally lead the negotiations. While Beijing would welcome Trump's personal involvement, China believes the best way forward is for officials designated by the two leaders to oversee the talks. This would be the most effective way to ensure that these negotiations lead to a meaningful summit between Xi and Trump. In essence, China's message is this: the U.S. should not question the legitimacy of the Communist Party's rule or threaten its continued hold on power. That is the first condition for negotiations. China demands that Trump restrain his cabinet members from making disparaging remarks about China, especially figures like President J.D. Vance, Secretary of State Marco Rubio, and Trade Advisor Peter Navarro. For example, Vance recently criticized the U.S. for borrowing money from Chinese peasants, which Beijing condemned. The vice president has made a point of distinguishing between China, the Chinese Communist Party, and the Chinese people, which has irritated the CCP. Navarro has pointed out that the CCP, by nature of its economics, can never truly cooperate with the U.S. and is untrustworthy. Then comes the Taiwan issue. China emphasized that it will not provoke conflict, but if it is provoked, it will respond forcefully. This signals China's desire for the U.S. to make a clear commitment on Taiwan, either to firmly oppose Taiwan's independence or to promise that the U.S. will not directly intervene to defend Taiwan. Only if these political conditions are met will China be willing to make significant economic concessions. Additionally, China proposes that both sides appoint negotiators and set up a presidentially supported liaison. The goal is to facilitate a Trump-Xi summit. It can be said that the U.S. China trade war has entered a high-risk phase. The 245% tariff gives the U.S. greater leverage, forcing China to consider compromise. However, some political analysts believe that China's additional conditions, such as asking the U.S. to respect the Chinese Communist Party, might be seen as unrealistic by American parties, which would lower the chances of starting negotiations. On April 16th, in response to the U.S. tariff hike to 245%, Chinese Foreign Ministry spokesperson Lin Jian demanded that the U.S. stop its threats and extortion, and that any dialogue with China will be based on equality, respect, and mutual benefit. He emphasized that there are no winners in a tariff war or trade war, and that China is unwilling to fight but will not fear it either. However, it is somewhat ironic that while China's officials claim they're not afraid of a trade war, they also admit that the tariff war isn't about taxes, but rather about China's survival. On April 15th, the head of the Hong Kong and Macau's Affairs Office, Xiao Baolong, stated, "The U.S. can't stand Hong Kong's success. It's not about our taxes, it's about our life. Whether it's a tariff war, a trade war, or any other kind of war, we have nothing to fear. The sky won't fall. If you think appeasing the U.S. and begging for peace will bring us peace, that's extremely naive. We need to give up such illusions." Let's analyze the different tones used by the CCP internally and externally. Xiao Baolong's strong rhetoric is aimed at the domestic audience to address nationalist sentiments and avoid being labeled as weak. Evoking life or death is emotional, but it precisely reflects the leadership's perception of the threat posed by the tariff war, and may be intended to pave the way for potential compromise. By using a Hong Kong official's voice rather than directly speaking from the central government, China reduces the risk of direct confrontation. Externally, the CCP has also leaked to Bloomberg that it seeks respect from the U.S. and hopes for compromise on Taiwan, showing that China still desires negotiations and wishes to maintain diplomatic flexibility. On April 16th, Chinese independent political scholar Chen Daoyin told Radio Free Asia that Xiao Baolong's remarks clearly represented the Chinese government's message, but with a difference from the foreign ministry's stance, indicating that China is determined to retaliate while keeping some options open. Chen Daoyin explained, "By speaking through Hong Kong, the CCP wants the outside world to understand that the Chinese government is fully aware of the impact of this tariff war and the potential harm it could cause to China's future development." The second point is that the CCP has a tradition of saying, "When faced with a narrow path, let the brave win. Since they want our life, we will fight to the death. We won't show weakness, but we can strike back precisely, which also serves to boost morale." But the fact that Xiao Baolong, a figure from Hong Kong rather than the central government, made these remarks shows that there's still room to maneuver. Chen Daoyin stated that President Xi Jinping's recent foreign visits were aimed at actively courting allies to counter the U.S., indicating that China has exhausted its options in the tariff war and now plans to use diplomatic strategies to respond. As the U.S. China trade war intensifies, Xi visited 3 Southeast Asian countries in an effort to strengthen economic and trade ties with neighboring countries in response to the high tariffs imposed by the U.S. At the same time, on April 16th, China suddenly announced a change in its trade negotiation representative. Li Chenggang, former representative to the World Trade Organization, replaced Wang Shouwen, who had held the position since 2022. Li will also serve as the Vice Minister of Commerce. Li Chenggang had previously criticized the U.S. tariff policy at WTO meetings and emphasized the importance of the multilateral trading system. Recently, he attended a meeting with entrepreneurs, which is seen as a transitional arrangement before his new role. Wang Shouwen had been removed from his position as the International Trade Negotiation Representative and the Minister of Commerce. The role of trade negotiation representative is crucial in the ongoing U.S. China tariff war. Reuters described this personnel change as unexpected. Alfredo Montúfar-Helu, senior advisor at the Conference Board's China Center, told Reuters, "We can only speculate as to why this happened at this precise moment, but it might be that, in the view of China's top leadership, given how tensions have continued escalating, they need someone else to break the impasse in which both countries find themselves and finally start negotiating." It is still unclear whether Wang Shouwen has been reassigned to another position. As of April 16th, his name has been removed from the list of the Ministry of Commerce's leadership team. An anonymous source from Beijing's Foreign Business Circle told Reuters that Wang Shouwen was seen as a tough negotiator and had engaged in heated confrontations with U.S. officials in the past. Before the U.S. escalated tariffs, Wang Shouwen had hosted several foreign business executives, including those from Pepsi, Visa, Procter & Gamble, Rio Tinto, and Vale. He reassured them that China's economic prospects remained strong. Previously, official Chinese data showed that foreign direct investment in China fell by $168 billion in 2024, marking the largest capital outflow since records began in 1990. Investment, consumption, and exports are the 3 key drivers of China's economic growth. The impact of the tariff war on China's economy has become a focal point of concern. From China's perspective, recent economic data released by the National Bureau of Statistics shows that in the first quarter, China's GDP grew by 5.4% year-on-year, surpassing market expectations. Industrial output and retail sales also exceeded forecasts. However, under the shadow of the tariff war, several major international banks have downgraded their GDP growth forecast for China this year. UBS lowered its forecast from 4% to 3.4%, while Morgan Stanley revised it from 4.5% to 4.2%. ANZ's chief economist for Greater China analyzed that this tariff war is not a one-time blow, but a structural change, affecting not only foreign trade but also other sectors. He told BBC Chinese, "For the past 40 years, China's rise had been based on globalization. It's certain that even if China's GDP maintains a growth rate of 4%, it will still struggle with deflation and rising unemployment. The Chinese government's short-term stimulus measures are likely to target low-end consumption, which will only sustain volume at best. Overall prices will decrease, meaning income growth will slow. Companies will compete by slashing prices to increase competitiveness, leading to even more intense internal competition." Economist Xi Jinping analyzed that the first quarter's economic performance showed improvement, but that was before the trade war started. In fact, official data from China has already indicated that the economy in the first quarter was affected by the tariff war. Xi Jinping explained, "The GDP grew by 5.4% year-on-year, but the quarter-on-quarter growth was just 1.2%. Normally, the first quarter would not have been heavily impacted by the tariff war, but strangely, the GDP difference in the first quarter shows that China's economy began to slow earlier than expected. By the end of the first quarter, the stage was already set for a significant deterioration in China's economic indicators, particularly those related to exports and imports." New data from the Ministry of Transport also shows that during the first week of the tariff war, from April 7 to 13, China's ports saw a 9.68% drop in cargo throughput and a 6% decrease in container throughput, with 5.94 million TEUs handled. Professor Xie Tian from the business school at University of South Carolina stated that the ongoing tariff hikes on Chinese goods have already severely impacted China's economy. Xie said, entering April, just in the first week, the decline in transport and trade volumes is already evident. The White House just announced that Trump has invoked the economic security law, and now the tariff on Chinese goods has reached 245%. The next step is that China's entire export and economic situation will face huge setbacks. I believe there will be a significant decline throughout April. The more the CCP boasts about low unemployment and good data, the more it will be exposed by reality. It will be hard to cover up the truth, as the trade deficit gap will be extremely large. And with tariffs raised to 245%, how much tax will China have to pay to the U.S., and which products will be subject to this 245% tariff? According to an April 12th report by the New York Times, some products exported from China to the U.S., such as syringes and needles, may face a total tariff rate of up to 245%. For specific products in 2024, the U.S. imported nearly $52 billion worth of smartphones, with over 80% of them coming from China. These products were originally expected to face tariffs as high as 145%. However, according to new guidelines released by U.S. Customs on April 11th, laptops and smartphones have been excluded from the 125% reciprocal tariff, but they still face the basic import tax of 20% introduced at the beginning of the year. As for Chinese-made syringes, these are among the products with the highest tariff rates, up to 245%. These products have been taxed since Trump's first term, and during the Biden administration, an additional 100% tariff was introduced in September last year to take a hard stance against China and protect U.S. domestic manufacturing. Additionally, the U.S. has imposed a wide range of punitive tariffs, 7.5% to 100%, on Chinese-made products such as clothing, solar panels, and electric vehicles. It accuses China of selling these products at far below market prices, impacting U.S. industries. This means that U.S. importers will face a tax burden of up to 245% on some Chinese goods, which is equivalent to 2.5 times the product's original price. Around 3/4 of toys in the U.S. are imported from China. Originally, products like tricycles, stuffed toys, dolls, and puzzles were exempt from tariffs, but now they will all face a 145% tariff, causing retail prices to rise significantly. Some products, even if not related to their origin, will still be subject to existing specific tariff rates according to their categories. For example, wool sweaters originally had a 16% basic tariff. With the additional tariffs imposed during Trump's first term, the average total tariff rate was about 24%. But with the new tariffs effective from February and the reciprocal tariffs this week, the import tax on Chinese-made wool sweaters has increased again. Steel and aluminum parts were already included in the global 25% tariff list established by the Trump administration in 2018. The latest round of tariffs is broader, covering all types of finished products, including aluminum or steel materials. Although most of the U.S.'s metal imports come from countries like Canada, China still supplies a large quantity of metal components. It's important to note that U.S. reciprocal tariffs exclude steel and aluminum products, so the overall tariff rate on Chinese-made metal products is actually lower than for other categories. On the other hand, imported cars and parts will also be affected by the new wave of tariffs. Starting in May, automotive parts, including door hinges, will face both car parts and aluminum product tariffs, although these products will be excluded from the reciprocal tariff that applies specifically to China.